What's going on? We are back at the video notes again. We're in the special senses and general senses unit. And the first thing we're going to start off with olfaction. Olfaction is your sense of smell, so we're going to jump right in it. Keep in mind some things I need you to understand. You need to be able to know all the structures that are involved in olfaction, all the structures, location for olfaction, and on top of that, you need to be able to know and be able to understand how olfaction works, and on top of that, be able to explain the process and how it could possibly be interrupted and what could go down. So without further wait, here we go. So the first thing we're going to go over are all the parts that help you smell any kind of odor or any situation like that. The sense of smell, like I said earlier, is called olfaction. There's the two things called olfactory organs, and there really are only two, one for each nasal passageway or nasal cavity. And their location is actually on each side of the nasal septum. The nasal septum is going to be that wall that basically kind of divides your nose into two sides, but it also ends up being a bone that separates your nose into two halves. So this is the bone here, separating into two halves. So right here we have your nasal cavity. The nasal septum is that bone, so this is going to also be the nasal septum here. You have the distribution of mucosa throughout this area here. If you notice, they're kind of showing you in relationship to where the front of your mouth is. That's where the tooth is. So if you went just above where your teeth insert in the front of the top of your mouth, that's where pretty much the nasal cavity is going to be located. You'll also notice that the olfactory bulbs are in this picture. I like this one a lot because it also shows you a front view where you actually can see pretty much where the olfactory bulbs are going to be located. So they're, if you're looking at this diagram correctly, and you have the two corners of your eye, they're pretty much dead center in the middle of the two corners of your eye, right in between your eyebrows. So the olfactory organs are divided into several different parts. The first thing you have is called the olfactory epithelium. This is a layer of tissue that's exposed to the entire nasal cavity. If you remember correctly, all epithelial tissue is exposed to some external surface, whether it be a cavity, a tube, or an external environment. In this particular situation, the olfactory epithelium is exposed to the nasal cavity. You also have things that are called olfactory receptor cells. These are the sensory cells that are involved in olfaction. They are a very specific type of chemoreceptor. And if you remember correctly from previous units, chemoreceptors are those that detect various kinds of chemicals. Things like the level of pH, oxygen levels, carbon dioxide levels. But in this particular one, they are looking for odorants, or things that actually are associated with odors. They are essentially, the olfactory receptor cells are just highly modified neurons. They are neurons with an exposed base or dendrites that have cilia that extend into mucus in the nasal cavity. What they contain on their surface of the cilia are receptor proteins for binding of odorants. So there's the cilia themselves, and then you also have the actual receptor proteins on those cilia. So if we're looking at this diagram here, I like this one because it has the route of air as you inhale through your nose. It goes into the nasal cavity. You will notice here that these extensions actually protrude through the ethmoid bone here from the olfactory bulb. This entire section here is what we're going to call the olfactory epithelium. If you take that diagram that I was just showing you here, and you take just this little square right in this area here, and you expand that out, what you'll see is this. So there's the top of the olfactory bulb there. There's the ethmoid bone, also called the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. And you'll notice that some of these neurons are synapsed here, but they also extend down through that ethmoid bone. The ones that extend down through the ethmoid bone are in fact the olfactory sensory cells. They're also called olfactory sensory neurons because they're specialized neurons. So they extend down and they extend down. There you have the somar cell body, and it also continues down through, and you have the cilia embedded in the mucus. The reason why it's called olfactory epithelium is because of the fact that these sensory neurons that are located right here are actually embedded in between a ciliated pseudostratified layer of epithelium. They're basically sandwiched between those. Some additional structures that you have are called olfactory supporting cells. Going back to that diagram again, all of these cells, these elongated that look like columnar, but they're actually pseudo-stratified columnar ciliated cells, they are there for support. What they do is they provide the structure or framework for all of these different olfactory sensory cells to extend through and be exposed to the external environment. The other thing I need to point out to you that they do is, if you notice this picture, you can't really see it, but these epithelial cells in pink here are also ciliated. Now their cilia aren't as long as the olfactory sensory cells, but the cilia here, their main function is you want to keep this mucus right here with a constant flow. So the cilia help with that situation. The reason you want to keep a constant flow is that mucus serves a purpose to dissolve any kind of odorants in the mucus so they can be absorbed by the actual sensory neurons. If there wasn't any kind of flow or movement to that mucus, you would have a constant stimulation of the same odorants because they would be dissolved and they wouldn't actually move throughout the entire olfactory epithelium. You also have what are called olfactory basal cells. Something that's super interesting about the neurons of olfaction is the fact that they actually are one of the only types of neurons in the entire human body that have the ability to regenerate. If you look up here at the top, they have these blue cells right here. Those are actually called basal cells, or in fact stem cells. Their main purpose is to replace these sensory neurons every so often. So they will grow into these sensory neurons and extend up and synapse into the olfactory bulb. So they are a regenerating type of nervous tissue. You also have what are called olfactory glands. Olfactory glands are the ones that produce a secretion. Now the secretion actually combines with water to form mucus that covers the olfactory epithelium. This mucus is very important. If you've ever noticed that when your sinuses are super dry, your sense of smell is kind of eliminated. Also, with too much mucus, your sense of smell can be eliminated. So what actually happens is the mucus that is produced is produced in a constant stream that flows across all the different sensory cells. And what it does is it actually allows a odorant to be dissolved and also be absorbed by the sensory cells. So if you look in this picture yet again, here's where you're going to have that olfactory gland, and its main job is to basically produce the mucus, and then it secretes it out on top of the epithelium, and thus allowing a nice protective but dissolving layer for all of those sensory cells. Now, those were all the structures of. So the main things you need to understand here are the fact that you have the olfactory epithelium, which is part of a larger structure called the olfactory organs. The olfactory epithelium is comprised of olfactory receptor cells, olfactory supporting cells, olfactory basal cells, and olfactory glands. Going through all of those, orange is going to be the sensory cells, pink is going to be the supporting cells, and blue is going to be the basal cells, combined with the glands that secrete the mucus for all of these to be soaked in. So how does smell actually work? What I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to show you really quickly the steps involved in smell physiology, and then I'm going to show you a TED Ed education talk, which really puts that into action. It gives you some interesting facts. So the first thing that has to happen in smell physiology, or the ability to smell, is you have to inhale through the nose. So if you take a nice big inhale through the nose, that air comes in. It does two things. One, when you inhale in there, it actually warms the air and moistens the air. The other thing it does is it allows particulates in the air, or airborne particles, to swirl in your olfactory, right around all the olfactory organs, but also swirl and swirl and swirl, and that swirling allows them to embed into the mucus surrounding the cilia of the olfactory receptor cells. Remember, those are specialized neurons. So those particles involved in smell will get stuck in the mucus. What actually happens is they dissolve. When they dissolve, that allows them to interact and bind with the odorant binding proteins that are on those cilia for the cells. As soon as something binds to those odorant binding proteins, it adjusts the permeability of the olfactory receptor cell. Essentially, from our last unit, what happens is it depolarizes olfactory receptor cells, which changes them and starts the process of an action potential being sent down that particular neuron. Once that action potential is sent down the olfactory sensory cell, it travels from multiple olfactory receptor cells and converges into an olfactory nerve fiber, which then converges on the olfactory bulb. All the signals that are routed into the olfactory bulb then travel down two olfactory nerves. They're the first pair of cranial nerves, and they run directly to the cerebrum, hypothalamus, and portions of the limbic system. This is super important because the only sensory information that is absorbed by the entire body and all the sensory neurons, smell is the only one that doesn't have to pass through the routing system of the thalamus. If you remember from the brain unit, the thalamus is the one structure of the brain that takes all signals, and it's basically like the operator or the traffic controller says, you go here, you go here, you go here, you go here. Well, smell, those travel directly from the olfactory nerves and route themselves to the cerebrum, the hypothalamus, and portions of the limbic system. This plays a super important role in the fact that smells have a strong correlation with memory. That's where the hypothalamus and the limbic system come into play, but also with strong emotional responses. So that's with the hypothalamus. So if you ever notice like smells, you can get really angry at a certain smell, or you can get really happy with a certain kind of smell, or believe it or not, the entire cologne industry is designed to try to create smells that attract mates of some kind, or try to find a significant other for you. That's their whole purpose. Again, routing it directly to the hypothalamus, messing with the emotions. So I want you to keep these steps in mind, and we're going to watch this TED Ed video real quick.
It's the first sense you use when you're born. 1 out of every 50 of your genes is dedicated to it. It must be important, right? Okay, take a deep breath through your nose. It's your sense of smell, and it's breathtakingly powerful. As an adult, you can distinguish about 10,000 different smells. Here's how your nose does it. Smell starts when you sniff molecules from the air into your nostrils. 95% of your nasal cavity is used just to filter that air before it hits your lungs.
So if you didn't notice this, these are nose hairs.
But at the very back of your nose is a region called the olfactory epithelium, a little patch of skin that's key to everything you smell. The olfactory epithelium has a layer of olfactory receptor cells, special neurons that sense smells, like the taste buds of your nose. When odor molecules hit the back of your nose, they get stuck in a layer of mucus covering the olfactory epithelium. As they dissolve, they bind to the olfactory receptor cells, which fire and send signals through the olfactory tract up to your brain. As a side note, you can tell a lot about how good an animal's sense of smell is by the size of its olfactory epithelium. A dog's olfactory epithelium is 20 times bigger than your puny human one. But there's still a lot we don't know about this little patch of cells, too. For example, our olfactory epithelium is pigmented, and scientists don't really know why.
Pigmenting means it's like your skin. It actually has a certain color, or it develops a pigment or a dyed look to it.
But how do you actually tell the difference between smells? It turns out that your brain has 40 million different olfactory receptor neurons. So odor A might trigger neurons 3, 427, and 988, and odor B might trigger neurons 8, 76, and 2,496,678. All of these different combinations let you detect a staggeringly broad array of smells. Plus, your olfactory neurons are always fresh and ready for action. They're the only neuron in the body that gets replaced regularly, every 4 to 8 weeks. Once those neurons are triggered, the signal travels through a bundle.
That's where those basal cells come into play. They're the ones that regenerate and turn into actual olfactory sensory neurons.
Called the olfactory tract to destinations all over your brain, making stops in the amygdala, the thalamus, and the neocortex. This is different from how sight and sound are processed. Each of those signals goes first to a relay center in the middle of the cerebral hemisphere, and then out to other regions of the brain.
That place is called the thalamus.
But smell, because it evolved before most of your other senses, takes a direct route to these different regions of the brain, where it can trigger your fight or flight response, help you recall memories, or make your mouth water. But even though we've all got the same physiological setup, 2 nostrils and millions of olfactory neurons, not everybody smells the same things. One of the most famous examples of this is the ability to smell so-called asparagus pea. For about a quarter of the population, urinating after eating asparagus means smelling a distinct odor. The other 75% of us don't notice.
I totally
and this isn't the
notice.
only case of smells differing from nose to nose. For some people, the chemical androstenone smells like vanilla. To others, it smells like sweaty urine. Which is unfortunate, because androstenone is commonly found in tasty things like pork. So with the sweaty urine smellers in mind, pork producers will castrate male pigs to stop them from making androstenone. The inability to smell a scent is called anosmia, and there are about 100 known examples. People with alicin anosmia can't smell garlic. Those with eugenol anosmia can't smell cloves. And some people can't smell anything.
So what it is basically, I would imagine that anosmia actually affects certain numbers of neurons that are directly correlated to that specific kind of smell. But can you imagine living your entire life without any kind of smell whatsoever?
This kind of full anosmia can have several causes. Some people are born without a sense of smell. Others lose it after an accident or during an illness. If the olfactory epithelium gets swollen or infected, it can hamper your sense of smell, something you might have experienced when you were sick. And not being able to smell anything can mess with your other senses too. Many people who can't smell at all also can't really taste the same way the rest of us do. It turns out that how something tastes is closely related to how it smells. As you chew your food, air is pushed up your nasal passage, carrying with it the smell of your food. Those scents hit your olfactory epithelium and tell your brain a lot about what you're eating. Without the ability to smell, you lose the ability to taste anything more complicated than the 5 tastes your taste buds can detect: sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and savory. So the next time you smell exhaust fumes, salty sea air, or roast chicken, you'll know exactly how you've done it. And perhaps be a little more thankful that you can.
Okay, so that was our video that kind of just goes over again what I was talking about with all of these, and kind of really has a nice animation to it. Again, if you have any questions whatsoever, please do not hesitate to ask me. Send me an email or send me a text message. Have a good day.